Earlier today, James Melville tweeted the latest bit of memory holing. This was his tweet. A framed narrative has been peddled around our political discourse that Liz Truss, a 45-day Prime Minister, somehow trashed the economy. In reality, the economy was trashed by months of lockdown and £500 billion of quantitative easing. The Chancellor at the time was Rishi Sunak. James Melville joins me now. How the hell, even in our incompetent media culture, does Rishi Sunak, the man who did this to the British economy, get passed off as some kind of economic genius?
Well, apparently this is the new normal, Mark, isn't it? I mean, you're right. I mean, the last 3 years we live in an inverted political landscape. Rishi Sunak is not the solution. He's part of the problem. They're all part of the problem. We end up in a Mobius loop of the same politicians like ghouls from politics past coming around to haunt us again. We've now got Jeremy Hunt back. We've got Michael Gove back for the umpteenth time to haunt us once again. But going back to Sunak, to answer your question, Sunak presided over the greatest scale of quantitative easing in British history, pretty close to 500 billion, largely obviously a response to COVID and furlough and so on. But it's not just that. You know, he didn't pay the insurance on the rise in quantitative easing and the interest payments around that. That cost the taxpayer roughly 11 billion. Also, he increased national insurance. He also was asleep at the wheel on the starting points of the cost of living crisis. Inflation's been rising all year. He didn't do much about that. He's then got embroiled in a leadership contest. First of all, it didn't work out for him. Liz Truss became a bit of a patsy for this. I mean, Liz Truss was not prime ministerial material. We know that. But 45 days is not long enough to see if she could learn on the job. And to blame her for effectively the economic crash that is a global thing, but also aspects in terms of Sunak's response to that is for the birds. And Sunak said today that we need to learn from our mistakes and we'll fix the mistakes. Well, some of the measures that he put in place were the mistakes.
Well, that's a very good point, but the MPs in his parliamentary caucus seem willing to buy it. In other words, that he's the safe pair of hands to steady the ship after he blew a hole in the ship in 2020 and 2021. Do you think the public will buy it when the general election comes?
Well, I mean, they'll leak it out till 2024. You know, say a week is a long time in politics. That's certainly, a day is a long time in politics right now. So who knows what happens in 2 years. The economy might turn, but we are looking at a cost of living crisis that isn't going to go away. It's going to deepen. And, you know, history's taught us a number of things, one of which is very, very difficult for incumbent parties and government to actually win elections. But going on back to Sunak again. He's self-entitled. It didn't work out for him the first time. He got it the second time. He was effectively anointed and there was a coronation without a single vote being cast. And I think the public will look at that and think, well, where's the mandate? The mandate was with Boris Johnson and all his flaws to get Brexit done. He's now two back in terms of the heritage of prime ministers, where then Liz Truss that basically became a kind of useful patsy for this process. And now we've got Sunak, who basically has no mandate. It is an affront to our democracy that Rishi Sunak is our prime minister. Now, I know people say that it doesn't really matter because basically it's up to the parties to decide who the prime minister would be. But I think it does matter. If he had any integrity whatsoever and courage, he'd have called an election today and then let the public decide.
Yeah, that happened 100 years ago when Bonar Law took over from Lloyd George as Prime Minister, and he went to the palace to kiss hands with George V, and a couple of days later they announced an election for, I think it was November the 15th. We could have an election on November the 15th now. But oddly, a century later, the democracy of the United Kingdom has so evolved that what matters now is that there are certain powerful persons in the British state and beyond who want this guy in number 10, and they overrule the 67 million riffraff scattered through these islands.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to be serving us. You know, we don't serve them. They don't own us. We own them. But democracy's front and centre of all of this. I think there should be an election right now. They're saying, well, there can't be an election because there's more uncertainty and we've got to calm the markets. I understand the markets are an important part of this mix, but also the public are, and they've got no say. Sunak has no mandate. And Sunak is going to be haunted by this right up to the next election. I mean, if the economy turns and the polls narrow, then he might have a chance. But right now, it's not looking too good. And as I said at the start, he was part of the problem in terms of this economic crisis. We had a government that inflation was rising, cost of living crisis was deepening all year long, and they've wasted most of the summer and the autumn indulging, as I said last time, to a vaudevillian display of a circus combined with a game show, literally under Game of Thrones politics. And meanwhile, the public are looking at this and they're trying to work out how to pay their bills.